A man framed a copy of a check and hung it on his office wall like a diploma. The signature on it was Jimmy Hoffa's, and a federal court had forced him to write it. $359,000, paid in 1963 to a trucking company that the most powerful labor boss in America had spent years trying to break and couldn't. The man was J. Harwood Cochran. The company was Overnite. And the reason that check was worth framing is that almost nobody beat the Teamsters in those years. Cochran had. He started the whole thing in 1935 with one tractor, one trailer, and a single straight truck. He hauled through the back end of the Depression, through the war, through the long freight boom that came after, and the entire time he ran the company on one rule that shaped everything that followed. Overnite would stay non-union. Whatever it cost, however long it took, the Teamsters were not getting in. From those 3 trucks, he built one of the largest non-union carriers in the country. A coast-to-coast network of terminals and thousands of drivers, all of it run outside the system that controlled almost everyone else who moved freight for a living. In American trucking, that was close to heresy. The Teamsters owned the long-haul business, they set the wages, they set the work rules, and a carrier the size of Overnite staying out of the fold wasn't just unusual. It was a standing insult. Cochran took the lawsuits and the organizing drives and the pressure year after year, and he kept winning. The framed check was the proof. The union had come for him at the peak of its power and walked away beaten. He didn't run it forever. In 1986, he sold Overnite, and by the early 90s, he was gone from the company completely. Which matters because the war that made Overnite a household name in trucking didn't happen on his watch. It happened to the company he left behind, and it was started by the son of the man whose name was on that check. In 1998, James P. Hoffa was elected president of the Teamsters, his father's union, his father's chair, and one of the central promises of his campaign was that he would finally do the thing his father never could: bring Overnite's roughly 13,000 workers under a Teamster contract. That wasn't a labor dispute anymore. That was a second generation walking back onto the same battlefield to settle a fight the family had already lost once. But there was something underneath it that the workers outside the terminals mostly didn't see, and it had less to do with their wages than with the man giving the orders. Hoffa had inherited the Overnite campaign. His predecessor, Ron Carey, had pushed it nearly to the finish line before Hoffa took over. Instead of closing what Carey had started, Hoffa relaunched it as his own, his signature fight, the one that would prove he belonged in that chair. He was facing reformers and rivals inside his own union who wanted him gone, and a win at Overnite was exactly the kind of trophy that could quiet all of them. So the strike that broke out in 1999 was never only about the drivers. It was also about a new union president who needed a victory to survive. And that goes a long way toward explaining why the Teamsters kept pouring everything into a fight. The evidence kept telling them they were losing. There was one more thing working against the union, and it sat on the company's side of the table where the public couldn't see it. By the time of the strike, Overnite wasn't an independent trucking outfit at all. When Cochran sold in 1986, the buyer was Union Pacific, the railroad. For about $1.2 billion, one of trucking's most stubborn non-union holdouts had become a subsidiary of a railroad conglomerate. That changed the math entirely. A regional carrier might have cracked under a sustained Teamster campaign. A company with a railroad's balance sheet behind it could absorb the damage and wait the union out. The Teamsters weren't fighting Overnite's cash flow. They were fighting a war chest, and there was a quiet irony buried in it. The railroads ran heavily unionized workforces of their own, and here, a rail conglomerate was bankrolling the fight to keep the Teamsters out of trucking. The union's main weapon was clever, and legally it lived right on the edge. They couldn't choke Overnite from the inside because most of the workers wouldn't walk, so they used what's called ambulatory picketing. They followed Overnite's trucks to the customer's loading docks and picketed there. The theory was that other unionized workers wouldn't cross the line, and the customer would feel the pressure and drop Overnite just to make the pickets go away. On paper, that's smart. In practice, it needed one thing the campaign never had: real disruption. And it never had real disruption because the rank and file never showed up. The Teamsters won representation at only 27 of Overnite's roughly 170 terminals, and they never managed to sign a single contract at any of them. When the call came to walk off the job, more than 95% of the workforce ignored it, At 4 of the contested centers, out of 422 workers, 11 honored the picket line. 11. The number of strikers bled down from around 2,000 at the start to maybe 300 to 500 by the end, most of them having simply moved on to other jobs. A strike only works if your absence costs the company more than your presence. Overnight's people kept clocking in, the trucks kept rolling, and the customers were never given a real reason to flinch. Then it turned violent. The industry press reported that 57 overnight vehicles were shot at after the strike began. A federal task force opened an investigation into whether the shootings had Teamster links. Judges in 14 states issued restraining orders limiting what the union could do. Police said at least 5 of the shootings appeared connected to the strike. Overnite sued the Teamsters for $5.2 million over what it called a pattern of violence, and the company's own filings put the numbers much higher. Dozens of alleged acts of attempted murder, well over 100 alleged acts of extortion. Those were Overnight's accusations, not proven findings, and the union denied ordering any of it and blamed individuals. But the part that actually mattered was strategic. Overnite took the violence and turned it into a legal weapon. It went to the National Labor Relations Board and argued that intimidation had tainted the elections, that the votes themselves were compromised. The shootings meant to pressure the company became part of the case for throwing the union out. The strike ended in November of 2002. No contract. After 3 years, Overnite had won. And this is where every victory in the story starts to rot. In 2005, United Parcel Service bought Overnite for $1.25 billion. The name that had outlasted the Teamsters at the height of their power was retired. By 2006, it had become UPS Ground Freight, then UPS Freight. The badge was gone. Then the thing the strike had failed to do happened anyway. Once UPS owned the company, the Teamsters finally got in. In October of 2007, the former Overnite workers, now UPS Freight, ratified their first Teamster contract. More than 12,600 workers, organized in what was called the largest freight organizing victory in 25 years. The union had lost the strike and won the workforce. They just didn't win it from Overnite. They won it from the company that bought what was left. And then the victory curdled for UPS, too. The freight business never paid the way they'd hoped it would. UPS eventually took an impairment charge of roughly $500 million against it. And in 2021, it sold the operation to a Canadian company, TFI International, for $800 million. The name changed one final time to TForce Freight, and UPS turned back toward the small package delivery it had decided was the real future all along. Cochran's company beat the most powerful union in America twice, once against the father, once against the son. It won the lawsuit in the 60s, and it won the strike 40 years later. And the only thing from any of it still standing under its own name is a framed copy of a check on a dead man's wall.